And this story of Kennedy and this particular book is part of a larger vision you have for unpacking the history of that time. Say a little bit about the larger project.
Well, it's in essence the same story. Each of the four people whose lives and deaths I'm examining, JFK and Malcolm X, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, in that order because that's the order in which they died, each of them have a story that's a familiar story. We know that story. It's an ancient story, and it involves walking a way that results in a witness, in a death that points to the kind of transformation we all need and that we have to pass through as well. So it's four versions of the same story, and the story is, you know, people say to me, well, you know, this must be really depressing, you know, going into this thing, and then Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, and this is the end of hope. I don't believe so. It's a story of hope. I think it's a hopeful story. I think it's good news because of what they were willing to do and the consequences they were willing to accept, and that's the path we have to walk. But we certainly need to know the story, what happened to them, if we're going to walk it in a more perceptive way than we have been during the last 40, in his case, 45 years of denial of what the story really is. We don't know the story. We can't really know how to, for example, understand it in the case of Barack Obama.
And so you're doing research now on uncovering the story of Malcolm X more thoroughly.
Yes.
I know that you went to some of the trials that happened in the South related to King's assassination. Is that correct?
There was a trial in Memphis in '99, and it was a wrongful death lawsuit initiated by Coretta Scott King and her family, and it was 6 weeks of witness after witness, 70 witnesses who described a conspiracy to kill Dr. King. There was one of the assassins was there. He confessed. He was part of the courtroom scene, and there was a jury, 6 black, 6 white jurors, and they came forth with a verdict in a couple of hours that U.S. government agencies had been involved in the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. It wasn't a front-page headline next day, and I wondered why, and that gave me further impetus into the story, because I'd heard all these witnesses, and there was a New York Times reporter sitting next to me the last 2 days who hadn't heard the rest of the testimony, and none of that testimony ever appeared in anything like a big news outlet. So it's an untold story as to what lies behind all of this, and it's a story that gets into us a lot.
And you mentioned a moment ago the questions that examining these stories can raise for us about our current situation and the election of President Obama, who certainly claims Lincoln as an inspiration for himself, and who's often compared in his energy or his charism to Kennedy, and who was an opportunity, perhaps. I think Obama's campaign was an opportunity for opening up a deeper sense of hope or a possibility of change among people. What do we need to know about these stories that you've been investigating as we look very clearly, or with very clear eyes, at Barack Obama and his presidency in these times?
Well, let me give an example. You mentioned the American University Address, and if I had an opportunity with a bunch of people here, I'd say, how many of you are familiar with the American University Address? And I do that periodically and don't get very many hands.
Right.
It's by far the most important speech Kennedy gave in his life, and it led to his death. Now, in January of this past year, Barack Obama was endorsed by Caroline and Ted Kennedy. And if I had a bunch of folks here, I would ask, where did that happen? And we probably wouldn't have noticed, because the significance of the place had no resonance in our memory. It was American University.
Yes, it was.
So for Ted and Caroline Kennedy to endorse Barack Obama at American University meant they were saying, what JFK did at this site, we hope, proclaim a vision of peace and of disarmament and of hope. We hope that that will be carried out by this particular man, and that's why we're coming forward, which was very unusual for them to do. And you could put in parentheses, and we think he's doing so at the same risk. There's a lot going on there, and we don't have a clue to it because we don't know the JFK story. We don't know the American University address, and we've been prevented from learning that by the same media that kept us from learning about Martin Luther King's assassination. It's all tied together.
And is there a Virgil, is there a Merton for Obama's story? Someone, it's hard to answer that question now because it's too soon and too fresh, but some place where those questions are being asked with the depth that Merton asked them about Kennedy?
I think that's up to us, all of us. I don't think there's, Merton did ask those questions, and we can learn. For example, the story of what happened to King, it's all out there. Go to kingcenter.com. There's the whole trial is public. We just have to do our work. We're the Virgils. We're the citizens of this country. And Kennedy died at a point where he was isolated. Obama, if he gets isolated because we're not acting as our own, Virgils and leading into this process of understanding, the same thing will happen to Obama as Kennedy. He'll get isolated. And of course he is already. He's moving into a scene where he's surrounded by a national security state that doesn't want to make the moves that are necessary for our survival. So
how do we prevent that isolation as a people or as a movement for justice? How do we continue to keep Obama engaged so that isolation can't occur?
We overcome our own denial. We overcome our own denial. What the CIA, for example, does abroad, it does here. We don't get any free pass. We have to recognize that the institutions that are capable of these things elsewhere are doing it right at the heart of our state, of our country. If they can take out the President of the United States and a president-to-be, in the case of the Kennedys, if they can take out our two major prophets, Malcolm and Martin, they can take out anybody, and they will, and they is really we in terms of our cooperation with the process. We have to face the unspeakable in ourselves and in our institutions, and then take the kind of steps that will support any leader and actually be out in front of that leader considerably if he's going to do or she's going to do anything worth doing. It's up to us. And the Virgil, the Merton, isn't here any more than the Martin Luther King or anybody else to save us. So it's up to us. And a lot of things have happened in the last year that are very hopeful that maybe we can make it different the next time around.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Is there anything you want to add?
Thank you, Rose.
All right. Thanks.